Shalom. 5 days after the tragic fire that claimed the lives of 42 people on the Carmel forest, and which basically devastated everyone in Israel's sense of security, particularly people who lost family members, people who lost colleagues, people who were driven from their homes, and people who lost homes. The International Center for Loss, Bereavement, and Human Resilience wanted to make a brief statement that might be of assistance to people coping with these terrible, tragic events. First thing, perhaps, that we understand about losses such as these, particularly when it comes to the issue of loss of life, but also loss of home, is the tragic experience of loss of security, a loss of a sense that one has a place to go to, that one can depend certainly on the government, on the forces that will be there for us. And as wonderful a job as they did after the fire had really begun to pick up force, the initial questions about why more was not done earlier are something that every citizen in Israel and perhaps overseas will have to consider. And this also increases one's sense that there is no secure base. More to the point of our center in this particular case, however, as we focus on bereavement, the loss of life to tragic events such as a fire without warning is something that serves to exacerbate and complicate the response to loss. I have two pictures that are more soothing, perhaps, than what I think we experienced in this case. The first one is by William Blake in the year 1805, the 19th century, early 19th century, where he shows the soul reluctantly parting with the body. And he's trying to say something here about the life force leaving the body and what it means. And there's a notion here in a soft way, perhaps, that saying goodbye to one's death, to oneself, and others saying goodbye to the person who died is a process where we're left with a remembrance of a whole and total body, and yet there's also a notion that the soul lives on. When in cases where there has been an attack on the body itself, such as when the body has not been found, in so many military events and the tragic bus bombings and suicide bombings that struck Israel so many times over this past decade before, we also had issues in how to understand better what happens when people's bodies, physical bodies, are also so upset or perhaps so attacked in the act of death itself. In the case of the fire, where so many people were burned, it complicates the bereavement, the thoughts about the person who died, to know that they suffered and that there was indeed the completeness of the body was violated. I wanted to show a picture from the 14th century from Giotto on family loss in the case of an accident and tragic death of a boy. And what you have here is the family holding the boy, being supported by townspeople, something that social support is incredibly important for, but the ability to hold physically and certainly psychologically the notion of the complete person is something that is, in the cases of loss such as we've had in this tragic event of the fire, is upset, and this complicates the bereavement process. I'd like, before I close, to respond and focus on three groups of people that we particularly aim to talk to. The first is the family of the bereaved, those people who are adults and who've lost close family members in these tragic events, that for them, the way the person died, the suddenness and the horrific events complicate the bereavement process and makes it a much longer and more complicated way of needing to put their own lives together and grieve for the deceased. That is something that needs time, and people should have the time, and we should be patient with them and understanding of them. The second group of people are children in the families, people who are very much affected by loss and bereavement, very much affected by how their elders are responding, but also have unique ways of thinking about loss and bereavement, have unique questions. They go in and out of the loss and bereavement issues, and it's a bit of an art, but also takes time and is worthy of time spent to answering questions that will appear over time, and to know that the kids will be okay if we give them the space to go their own way and grieve and mourn, that it will be different from adults. And the third group of people are the professional colleagues, friends, and co-workers in particular of the people who died, who are not identified formally as mourners, and yet many of them experience both a grief process and also a sense of personal commitment to their colleagues who were alive and who are now dead. And they also are in need of particular attention, and also to be aware within themselves that they too have experienced losses that may affect them in ways that they are not yet clear about. And certainly anybody who in any of these groups who's been experienced trauma and loss in the previous years is more sensitive than people who are in some ways and more suffering perhaps than people who are beginning to deal with it for the first time. And we'll stop here. Thank you for your attention.